Hello, everybody. This is James Diboe, Discovered, dedicated to original peoples. As always, we got a special guest straight from the United States. Brilliant brother, you know, interested on the linguistics of like Niger Congo, Proto Bantu, if anyone ain't aware of that. Allow me to welcome Asar Imhotep to the show. Welcome, my brother. I appreciate it.
Peace and blessings, and thank you for having me. And look forward to this important conversation.
Thank you very much. Now, one of the reasons I brought you on this show. A while ago, when I first started doing podcasting many years ago, I was speaking to people about a connection with ancient Egypt and speaking a Bantu, Proto-Bantu languages and that. I didn't have the full resources there when I was first doing it, but I
Mhm.
started learning more and more as I was going on about it, trying to make these connections. And then basically, I came across a lot of your work. Also, I understand you're the student of Philo Benga
Indirectly, not
indirectly.
a
Yeah,
direct
you,
student.
you studied his work like quite thorough. So now, this is a person I find very underrated. Very underrated there, Philo Benga. I mean, everyone's heard of Sheikh Anta Diop, but Philo Benga, he's important in his own field of research. And I want to begin with the connections with ancient Kemet and the Proto-Bantu language. And I must first start off now because when we get fed basically is that you have this so-called Afro-Asiatic language, even though it's an East African language. Some say it started
Mhm.
down in Eritrea, southern Ethiopia, and this Afro-Asiatic that they're talking about spread into Western Asia and parts of North Africa. Now, with the Bantu, they just deal with it in sub-Saharan Africa. But where does the first origin of what we call the Niger Congo language, Proto-Bantu, where does it begin?
Okay. Well, let me kind of back up and set the framework
Yeah,
from the position for which I come at it.
yeah,
So the standard articulation in regards to the categorization of African languages
yeah,
is that there's four large phyla, and phyla or a phylum is a language family, or excuse me, a language grouping that consists of smaller language families,
right,
if that
okay.
makes any sense.
Yeah, it does.
Right. So
Yeah,
so when you say Niger Congo, Afroasiatic, Khoisan, Nilo-Saharan,
yeah,
these are very large groupings that have subgroupings in them. So for example, the ancient Egyptian belongs to, or allegedly belongs to, Afroasiatic. And
yeah, allegedly.
Afroasiatic consists of Chadic, Omotic, ancient Egyptian as a standalone language or group of languages, Cushitic, all right, Semitic, and Berber languages. So those are all alleged languages and groupings, but they come together to create this larger super grouping that we call a phylum,
Okay.
right? So Niger Congo, in terms of its origin, there's really no consensus on where its origin is.
Okay.
Uh, but with, but when it comes to Proto Bantu, the standard argument is, or the standard hypothesis is, kind of like the border of Cameroon, Nigeria,
Yeah,
like
that's what I
in that area, right?
yeah.
So, so the position for which I take the stand is that none of these groupings are valid constructs. And the reason why they're not valid constructs is because in linguistics, you group families based upon the examination of the vocabulary, morphology, syntax, or whatnot, and you reconstruct a proto language using a method called the historical comparative method, right? The historical comparative method is, by analogy, equivalent to the scientific method when
Yeah.
you're dealing with natural science. And the scientific method is designed to, as much as possible, eliminate uh, bias uh, and what's the word I'm looking for? Chance as a valid explanation for what appears to be patterns that we're noticing in the data set, right?
Okay.
So this is very important because the historical comparative method in linguistics has the same goal, right, and achievement to where when it is used, the objective is to eliminate chance from the
Yeah.
data set and eliminate noise by the um, by the demonstration of regular non-accidental sound meaning correspondences between two or more languages. And this was never done for these proposals by Joseph Greenberg, who gave us Niger Congo, Nilo-Saharan, Afro-Asiatic, and Khoisan.
He create these
So
language families, basically.
yes, on a method that linguists do not use across the world. It's his own method, and not saying in the grander scheme of things that you can't create your own method, but the method he used is called mass comparison. And the mass comparison, a criticism against mass comparison, is that there's no way to distinguish lookalikes or chance.
Yeah.
So, every time somebody with a background in the comparative method tries to use the mass comparison method, we keep discovering false positives,
Yeah.
right, in the data set. So, I'm a computer scientist initially by training, and so we have a saying: trash in, trash out, right? So, if your methodology does not allow for you to demonstrate regular sound meaning correspondences between two or more languages, the
Okay.
outcome of it is not going to be uh, scientifically tenable, right?
Yeah.
And so this is, you mentioned Dr. Theophilo Binga earlier.
Yeah.
This was his issue with uh, Afroasiatic, so to speak.
Okay.
And so that kind of, uh, so it is as a result of that, Theophilo Binga went to the drawing board and did his analysis and argued that there's really only three language families in Africa. He kept Khoisan. He he eliminated Afroasiatic, and he made the Semitic languages out of Afroasiatic their own thing outside of Africa. These are not African languages.
Okay.
So it's Khoisan, Berber, and then what the language family that he calls Negro Egyptian or Black Egyptian language family, right? Which
Okay.
consists those which consist of all of those languages with the that would have been included in Niger Congo, Nilo-Saharan, and Afro-Asiatic, with the
Yeah.
exception of Berber taken out and Semitic languages taken out. So
Okay.
Berber is its own thing, and then Semitic is its own thing, but exists outside of African languages, right?
Okay. Right.
So then comes along in 2010, Jean-Claude Mboli, um, a an electrical engineer turned linguist who reanalyzed Dr. Obinga's work and modified it to where based upon stricter criterion because Theophilo Bingham, okay, so he made this big noise against Afroasiatic,
Yeah.
right? But he kept Niger Congo and Nilo-Saharan as well as Khoisan.
Okay.
So the issue is the same methods that were used to create Afroasiatic were the same methods that were used to create Nilo-Saharan, Niger Congo, and Khoisan. So if Afroasiatic is not a valid construct because of the methods, neither is Niger Congo, neither is Nilo-Saharan, neither is Khoisan.
Okay.
So what Mboli did is that he just started from scratch. No groupings, no assumptions whatsoever.
Yeah.
Started with a small data set of 6 languages and then moved up to about 13 languages. And he kept the label of Dr. Theophilo Bingo in terms of Negro Egyptian, but now it's by way of demonstration limited to these languages until other languages, are brought in and gone through the same rigor as those initial 13 languages, right?
Okay.
So saying all that to say that, I come from the perspective of Negro Egyptian. And now when we start getting to Proto Bantu in reality is synonymous with Negro Egyptian itself. So Proto Bantu is really the mother of all of those languages in Negro Egyptian.
Okay. Yeah.
So the languages that we consider Bantu today are just a type of Bantu in its own branch. Whereas same thing with ancient Egyptian, same thing with Chadic, same thing with Yoruba and Yoruboid languages like Igbo, etc. Akan languages, Twi, et cetera, et cetera. These are all types of quote unquote Bantu languages,
Yeah.
right?
Because
And
yeah.
so,
Because
go ahead.
yeah. Because funny if you said that. Like, because if you look on on the map, like it's these maps that they draw up with different languages on, and usually sub-Saharan African, they'll show you there Niger Congo A and Bantu they put on the B. I'm sure you've seen it, and it shows you from
Yeah.
West Africa right to East Africa. And then it shows you like a Nilo-Saharan, which is lumped in kind of with the Afro-Asiatic, then the other Khoisan, and then you can get also in Madagascar. Because I went to Madagascar as well, and you've got parts of it that's they call Bantu, and parts of it is Austronesian. You know, so now with what I do get is basically like them languages you just said before, like Yoruba, um, some of the ones in Liberia and parts of that. Now I'm aware of the Mandi. Mandi, would that come under the so-called Niger Congo Proto-Bantu, the Mandi?
Yes, the Manding languages, Mande and all of that, according to Mboli, would be like one of the earliest branches to branch off,
Okay,
right?
yeah.
Now, I'm in agreement with uh, Dr. G.J.K. Campbell Dunn. He has done some initial work with comparing quote unquote Niger Congo and Sumerian language.
I was
And
going to come to that as well. Mm,
he he argues that Sumerian ultimately is a Niger Congo,
yeah.
and it is akin to, and of course, G.J. Cable Dunn is not Negro Egyptian in that camp. He's still with the Greenberg camp, but
Oh, okay.
related to the languages of Niger Congo, and that it probably branched off around the same time that the Manding languages branched off. So that's his argument.
Yeah.
Uh, but that, but you have others who, you know, including myself, who put Sumerian, well, I put it in Negro Egyptian, but there's others who have compared it with Bantu, and Holmstein, he compared it with Proto Bantu. And, all of them are saying that Proto Bantu, uh, Proto Bantu, or at least if I can put it in, I'll put it in a previous context, but that one branch that we consider Bantu languages, that Proto Bantu, um, and Sumerian share the same ancestor. So, so they're saying that Proto Bantu and Sumerian branched off uh, roughly at the same time.
So see where we've got Sumerian now, and then we've got like parts of course here we've got Kemet, the connection language. How, where did you look like? I've looked at Nigeria and also Cameroon,
Mm.
particularly where they share the border. When he sort of speak about the Proto-Bantu language, do you find like a knowledge of the Proto-Bantu language? Like why I asking that is because to spread from as far as Sumer to Kemet to also parts of sub-Saharan Africa. Is there any origin of a Proto-Bantu where you think it started in order for it to really spread fast?
Yes, again, it really just depends on, what school of thought you're in, right?
Yeah.
Now, I am of the school of thought that what we're calling, so let me just say this, uh, because I didn't quite give the full analysis, and this is why I wish I had my uh, screen to share. I could just kind of show your audience.
Yeah.
But within the Negro Egyptian, there's a pre-Proto-Bantu and then Proto-Bantu.
Okay. Okay.
And so the Proto-Bantu is the language group that, is the mother of the common Bantu languages that we understand today, kind of
Yeah.
Cameroon, Central Africa, et cetera, et cetera. And then the pre-Proto-Bantu is the language that set it off, and gives birth directly to Egyptian in its line, Hausa in its line, and then from there kind of breaks into two branches, which Mboli calls Bere and Beher.
Yeah.
And Bere spelled Bere, and Beher Beer. They're both words for liver, but they're spelled with the same consonants, but the vowels are placed differently. So you have consonant, vowel, and better, and then
Yeah.
you have consonant, vowel, vowel, consonant for bed, right?
Because the
And
Hausa, I know that's in Nigeria. Is that how it's spread with the Hausa coming into like Nigeria area, or was it spread through various other tribes, maybe?
no, so so I'm getting to your question
Yeah.
via
Yeah.
that explanation, right? So those two branches for Emboli originates somewhere in Eastern Africa in the Great Lakes region, right?
Right.
And
Okay.
and so the two branches, Bere and Biher, you know, kind of moved up towards Sudan,
All right.
and
Okay.
Sudan is the spreading place.
Okay.
You know
Okay.
what I'm saying? Like that
Yeah.
bottom part of Sudan. So some of the branches, um, some of the groups went up through the Nile Valley and out of Africa, and
Yeah.
others spread, saying from there, right?
Yeah.
And so these are not, simultaneous migrations, at one time. These are different migrations
All right.
over time, and not only that, they're interacting with each other throughout
Yes.
time. So
Is
they're
this
sharing culture, they're sharing language, and it makes for a unique understanding of the relationships
is this at
between
the
groups.
point in time where the Sahara was not a desert, where with more vegetation, green, lakes running through it?
Yes, that plays a major role in the dispersion
Yeah,
of
yeah, that's it.
right. So, some of those languages that originate, you got to remember, like some of the languages that we know in modern times did not exist, 2, 3,000 years ago.
Yes,
They're dialects
yeah,
that, kind of branched off and became languages in modern time as a result of, you know, environmental issues, wars, slavery, et cetera, et cetera. A good book. It's a classic book that I think best explains that is the destruction of Black civilizations.
oh yeah, Chancellor Williams. I've got that
Chancellor
one.
Williams.
Yeah, yeah, I've got that
Yes.
book.
So that's a very good, and I think for a non-linguist, like his explanation really fits in with the data in
Yeah,
terms of what is happening. So a lot of these groups we think are different really aren't different in the in real
yeah,
in nominal terms. But some of those groups, as a result of the Green Sahara drying,
yeah,
some moved down into Chad, into Nigeria,
yes,
right?
yeah,
There's already people there
yeah,
in these places, and now these people are integrating with them. And it's the
yeah.
same thing with ancient Egypt. So a lot of them are coming now to populate and repopulate the Nile Valley. And as a result of this influx of these Africans coming from the south as well as from the east, the west
Mm,
into the Nile Valley, that culminates in this fight for resources and the things is what starts pharaonic Egypt.
yes, yes, yeah. Because I was studying Dr. Ahmed Clyde Winters, and he was speaking on when he was speaking about the Sea Group people, and they were in like the Green Sahara, well, when it was green at the time, and he was speaking about them spreading not just only in different parts of Africa, also coming out of Africa to Sumer. What was the other place? Elam, and he
Hmm.
also spoke on them all the way up to Melanesia as a
Hmm.
migration, possibly around maybe I think he gave a date about maybe it was 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, around about that time. So I don't know if that in also he's making because I know he's a linguistic as well. You ever studied Dr. Clyde Ahmed Winters?
Yeah, I'm very familiar with him,
Yeah.
and to be honest, I'm in a disagreement with the vast majority of his work,
Okay.
um, and so just to
Would that
keep
be
it
the
PG,
linguistic side or the archaeology side?
yeah,
Bit of everything.
it,
Yeah.
it's I'm a kind of person that uh, it's a certain level of rigor that I'm used to and I demand
Yeah.
uh, from scholars. And like, and me and him have personal we've had conversations like on the phone, right?
Yeah.
And he was trying to criticize, for example, Jean-Claude Bowling's text.
Right.
And so, I have criticisms of Jean-Claude Bowling's text in certain areas.
Yeah.
But, I come from the school that you can't make a criticism about a work you've never read,
Of course. Of
right?
course. Yeah.
That it doesn't make any sense, right? If we was to go back in biblical days, they would call it giving false witness, right?
Yeah.
And so this is what he does.
Mm.
And so even several times I've gone back to check certain work of his, I'll go to the source material where he's making a claim that a writer is making a claim And that is not what they're saying at all
Okay.
on the page. And it's just an accumulation of this stuff over the years. I've just had to give up on our good brother. I wish him well. But,
Yeah. So,
there's some things he's kind of like generally there's some evidence for it.
yeah.
But without that rigorous analysis to back it up, then it's for naught. So like I would really encourage like a future scholar
Yeah.
who's interested in classical civilizations and things to take up the research questions of Dr. Clyde Winters, but to do it rigorously and you
Mhm.
know so that we have a foundation to build upon,
Yeah.
uh, other than so that the world community doesn't have a good reason to summarily dismiss the work and the claims.
I've
Now,
seen a lot of criticism towards them. I have seen a lot of it. It was the fact that I was always looking for the connections from one part of Africa to the other part of Africa. And that's how I came across Clyde Winters' work. And then I started coming across Philip Benga, and then I started coming across yourself. And some of the brother you just met, you mentioned before, John Claude. I actually first seen him on your show. You've had him on before, haven't you?
yes,
Yeah. So as I'm starting to come across more people, I was aware that also as well, Diop connected the Wolof to ancient Egyptian language, the Wolof. So like I said, I've always been trying to make the connections. Not easy at all, like you know what I'm saying. But it's because I can see how the Eurocentrics as well. You know what they did with ancient Kemet, made out they were Euro-Asian people and connected to
mhm,
them this Semitic, pretty much Afro-Asiatic. You know, so when we're dealing with what the so-called Afro-Asiatic, this language now. Do you
mhm.
find this origins coming out of Africa or coming into Africa from whether it
Well,
was other regions? Because they had there's the big dispute of where is the origin of the Afro-Asiatic language? Some are pointing into Asia, and then some are pointing into East Africa.
indeed, yes. So again, uh, there's a certain rigor that I expect to
Yeah,
see, and uh, and as somebody who has been searching for this and looking through all the data, I have all the major works dealing with Afroasiatic, and there is not one text that has demonstrated using the comparative method the existence or the validity of Afroasiatic, right?
okay,
So for me, we can't talk about origins until we talk about existence,
yeah,
until we
definitely,
validate existence, right? So
yeah,
that's like trying to say, um, like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Where did Rudolph originate, right? Or where does Superman originate? Like we know like comic origins, but if you're arguing it's a real person, then we have to establish the validity of the person's existence.
yeah,
So, it's trying to argue for the validity of Afroasiatic is the same as trying to argue, whether Santa Claus wore a Gucci belt, you know, um, or I don't know what other kind of belt exists in that, or let's just say that he had a Gucci belt, right?
yeah,
Well, first of all, does Santa Claus exist? All right, before we get to his clothing or whatnot, we have to establish if he existed, and it's the same thing with Afroasiatic. So there has not been enough evidence to establish that Afroasiatic exists. So we can't talk about origins for a non-valid construct. You get what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like
Yeah.
it just doesn't make sense. And so, like, if I was to uh, read, for example, um, there's a an Egyptologist and linguist by the name of Loprieno, right? And in 1986, in a German text, Das Verbal in Egyptian, um, he he gives a good analysis in terms of the non-existence of Afroasiatic. But keep
Okay.
in mind that he believes in an Afroasiatic, right?
Yeah.
Um, he uses the term like he exists within an Afroasiatic frame, but he has to admit the following. So, uh, and I could take a screenshot of this and give it to you. So if you edit this, you can put it on the screen, for your audience.
Yeah.
And so he says the following. It's translated into English from German. In view of the present state of research, a comparative grammar of the Hamido-Semitic languages goes beyond what is scientifically attainable, even in the sense of an algebraic reconstruction. Our comparisons will therefore have to renounce traditional historical model of diachronic linguistics and instead will extend the typological approach. Here, the overlappings need not necessarily go back to a posited common Afroasiatic, but will rather represent Afroasiatic as a realized construct. Thus, Afroasiatic will never be a reconstructible language, but only the reconstructed sum of historically attested points of linguistic juncture independent of their origin and carried out for the sake of a particular investigation. This sum may be interpreted in terms of genetic relationship, Sprachbund, aerial linguistics, or allogenetic relationship. The result of allogenetic contacts between Afroasiatic languages will also have to be considered as belonging to the structure of Afroasiatic, just as much as are the results of genetic relationship. Lastly, Afroasiatic can only be considered an abstract construct of linguistic features and not a unified system of linguistic realities.
Okay.
So, saying all of that to say, what he's saying is that there's no way for us to use the historical comparative method, the standard method in linguistics, to establish language family.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to accept that if we're going to keep Afroasiatic, that it is going to be a categorization of typological features. Now, I should stop right here because there's a difference between genetic features, features that are inherited from the same proto language down to the descendants, versus typological similarities.
Yeah, got genetics as well. They kind of like lump the same thing in like together, genetics and linguistics, like um sort of like when they were trying to say that the people of ancient Kemet are not related to anyone in what we call sub-Saharan Africa, unless they're referring to the people of Somalia, Ethiopia, and other areas.
Yeah, so like a typological feature would be like fins on sea creatures, right?
Yeah,
So we know that just because whales live in water, that they're not directly related to sharks and other fish and the like. Even
yeah,
though they have similar shapes,
yeah,
that does not mean they're related. So we know from the record that whales were land mammals that walked the earth at one time and existed and adapted and evolved in the water.
yeah,
Thus, why they have those features. So you can have similar features as a result of the same uh, evolutionary forces in the same environment. So that's one, so those are typological similarities. You know, we, we're a group together because, you and I have facial hair,
Yeah.
right? And we'll say that everybody that has facial hair, they are related to each other. And all
Okay.
the males that don't have facial hair, they're
Yeah.
related to each other, right?
Yeah.
But that of course as soon as that's going to change when one of them decides to grow hair and one of us decides to shave, right?
Mm.
So it's not a valid way to group people, and it's the
Yeah.
same way in linguistics. So what he's saying is that Afro-Asiatic can only be considered a typological grouping, meaning that they have similar uh, features, similar way of pronunciating words and the like. But he also mentioned in here that you have to consider that they've been in contact with each other
Yeah.
over thousands of years. So in environmental science and even in linguistics, this particular concept is called convergence, right? Like certain features exist in different populations. Again, as I said, because they've converged on a type because they
Yeah.
exist in a similar environment.
I mean, it's like when I went to visit the Maasai tribes in Kenya. They would all
Hmm.
the tour man who was taking me was he said he's not considered as Maasai. He said he is Bantu. So
Hmm.
this is when I first started really looking into Bantu, and then I started seeing the connections to other parts of Africa. So when we were there on our way to go and see the Maasai tribes, and he was explaining that because at one time I was quite like I didn't really understand when I thought I'm going to Kenya, the people are Kenyan. That's what I was thinking. Like one group. That's what at first, and then I realized he was explaining. No, there's several groups. There's even the time the Khoisan were even there. So there's. Um, it was interesting. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that around that area, what we call close to the Great Lakes region, and even in the ancient Cometics, when they spoke on coming from the beginning of the Nile, where God happy dwells, the foothills, the mountains, the moon. We're dealing with is it the three mountains that form the foothills of the mountains of the moon, like Kilimanjaro? Is it Mount? Forget the other two. I know Congo's connected to these areas.
Yeah, we I have to say we have to be careful about that quote.
Okay,
So
yeah,
that quote comes from Dr. Ben
that's right. Yoshi Ben
and
Yakinen. Yeah,
Yosef Ben Yakinen. And so researchers, including myself, have looked into that claim of his, saying that it was, what was it, the Papyrus of Hugh Nefer
that's right.
that
Yeah,
that
yeah,
that particular story came about, or that particular claim. So when we look into it, because we're reading the hieroglyphs now,
mm,
it doesn't exist in that text. And
okay,
I even called him. This was in his later years,
yeah,
and all he could do was refer me to his book, which was the Black Man of the Nile text, which it just repeats what he says
yeah,
in
yeah,
his
yeah,
common lexicon.
yeah,
And so what's ill about that is that on the back of the book of uh, the Black Man of the Nile, it has his phone number, and that's what I called. So his wife answered the phone, and it was like, is Dr. Beard available? And she was like, sure, and handed Dr. Beard the phone. So I didn't have a relationship with Dr. Ben, but
okay,
I just called that number that was on the back of the Black Man. And, so, but as it stands, that quote doesn't exist. So I wouldn't use that to make an argument in terms of the origins of the quote unquote ancient Egyptians.
But you find the migration though, don't you? You were saying before about the Bantu starting off in the Proto Bantu, possibly the Great Lakes region,
Yes.
migrating down the Nile and going through Sudan, and then it was sort of like you were explaining, branching off from each other from there. Some went into what we call Kemet, the Green Sahara, and then
Yeah.
yeah, then the migrations east-west, sort of north-south type of thing from the Green Sahara, Chad, around this area.
Indeed. And we also got to keep in mind timeline.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
definitely.
this is also a period of, 10 to 15,000 years for the initial spread. And but, when we're talking about the development of pharaonic Egypt, we're just talking like maybe 6 to 800 years in terms of the start of the migrations coming out of the Sahara
Yeah,
into the Nile. And keep in mind, there's already pockets still there. It's
yeah,
it's just when the Green Sahara initially started, becoming green again.
yeah,
There was no privileged uh, there was no privilege and advantage of staying in the Nile Valley because the Nile River is just one river of many,
yeah,
going into this area. So people were migrating with their herds, into these particular areas. And so the population actually diminished in Egypt over time. But
yeah,
it's but when the after the last glacial ice period and the melting of the ice, that melting of the ice drew the moisture that was in North Africa and in Arabia away from the continent. And
yeah,
that's what started the desertification and thus pushing, those who survived uh, further and further down and out, from that particular center. But that same event also caused people from the Levant to come in and
right.
settle in pre-dynastic times. So in the Delta area, you have pockets of people. You have indigenous, Africans there, but you also have pockets of people coming out of the Levant area
Yeah.
and settling into the Nile looking for water. Right? And
And this is
so
pre-dynastic times.
this is in pre-dynastic times. So
Yeah,
this may be the cause initially. So when you're talking about two kingdoms, what are the two kingdoms that they're talking about? You're talking about people in the Delta and the people on the strip on the Nile Valley itself. And so
yeah,
when you have the likes of Narmer, now you see Narmer and in the military attacking and taking parts of the Delta and the Delta itself and combining it to quote unquote two lands,
yeah,
combining it. Now it's pharaonic Egypt. So this is why we have to be careful when we talk about, Egyptians and who was not, because if this is one state,
yeah,
everybody, regardless of their ethnicity, their skin color, are quote unquote Egyptians in terms of the state. But the ruling class, the ruling group of people, the Remetch, those are the people that we're trying to discover because they're the ones who set the precedence, the matrix for the ancient Egyptian civilization and things from that point going forward.
yeah.
Right?
Because
That's supposedly the
Chancellor William, before the book you were quoting, Destruction of the Black Civilization, he's trying to like find like ancient records and all that, and he's explaining about 3100 BC. Because what he seems to do here, Chancellor Williams, what I found is, if he's unsure about something, he doesn't just like give an opinion. So he was talking about these ancient records because there's one record he speaks about which is about 2181 BC, around about that, talking about people invading into coming from the area you were saying the Levant into Kemet. But then he's saying there's records earlier. I don't know where he's seen the records of the ancient original Egyptians going into them lands, Asia, and conquering them. But he's not too sure about some of the records because if you notice the title of his book, from 4000 BC to 2000 AD.
Mhm.
But if you read in his book, he kind of like references a lot of times that he's not guessing these dates, but it's a possibility that these dates could go back earlier. But he's kind of like, in some parts, it almost seems like he's unsure, but he definitely must have some sort of evidence of records of Egyptians winning. He calls them whites a lot. Where Diop, I notice he says that a mixture of people, like a mixture between how can you call it? Like Diop seems to speak on the Semitic type people, like of in I don't know if he wants to call it Indo-European mixing with the original black peoples of what we call Western Asia, where I find that Chancellor Williams will speak on these are the white Arabs. So when I had Robin Walker on my show, he broke it down to where he said, well, sometimes Chancellor Williams might refer to someone as a white Arab, but let's not give people away. They are actually a mixed group. Where like I find DRB kind of like these explains. He breaks down DNA really strong. Diop, even if he's talking about ancient India, for example, he will say they are a mixture between Indo-European, Dravidian, and he also puts Mongoloid in there. So,
Mhm.
and then he breaks down China and says the Chinese are a mixture of black and white mixing in a cold climate. So Diopifine really breaks it down. I'd say a lot better than Chancellor Williams, but Chancellor Williams' work is still interesting.
Yeah, it's complicated
It is
because
complicated. Yeah, it can be very complicated.
because like I wish I could share my screen,
It's like
but
when someone says origin of the Arab people, for example, we get different we get different opinions of it. But I'm always more interested in like if we look at the area where Arabia is, it's only really the Red Sea that separates it from Africa. Really, it's Northeast Africa if you want to really deal with it geographically. Some people want to lump it into Asia. Would you consider Northeast Africa Arabia?
no,
What would you
because
consider as?
it's just Northeast Africa.
Yeah, there's no
It's
middle, no,
so
none of this Middle East or this Middle East invention. Yeah,
all borders are uh, human inventions
yeah,
and
yeah,
political. So
yeah,
if we talk about Africa and it ends at the Sinai Peninsula, then anything within that border is Africa.
yes,
They,
definitely agree.
they created the border, and but these borders do not stop human beings from going back and forth.
Yeah, yeah,
So these are arbitrary, even in the context of African.
yeah,
And I've said this before, like all of these borders, these borders were set in 1884.
yeah.
In the Berlin Conference by
That's right.
Europeans coming to colonize. The
Yeah,
name of Africa itself, it comes in the direction of Europeans. Like, what's the border of Asia? What is Europe? I mean, Europe even being a continent,
yeah.
even though it's not surrounded by water on either side.
Eurasia. Yeah, yeah,
So like all of these things are political in nature. So if we're going to have a scientific conversation, then we need to have a grouping that is not racially based, that is not politically based, right? And so, with the understanding that there's going to be overlap uh,
Yeah.
for a number of reasons, for migrations back and forth, there's migrations coming out of Asia into Africa, some,
Mass
6 to 8,000,
migrations. Yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah, BCE, right? Um, so, but that does not mean that uh, they remained first of all, you don't even know what they look like 8,000, 6,000 BCE. You're assuming that they look exactly like the people who live there now, but even let's assume
Yeah.
that they did. So if they uh, look like that but came and migrated into Africa, they all they could, unless it was just a super, millions of people migrating at once,
Mm.
they're coming into Africa, assimilating, and the skin color is still going to darken and
Yeah.
be the same over time. So it's almost irrelevant to even mention there was some back migration,
Yeah.
8,000 BC. Like who cares?
Yeah.
And that's way before pharaonic Egypt anyway. So this is why, like, when you see the work that I'm doing,
Yeah.
I'm looking for those specific cultural traits
Yeah.
that exist in other parts of Africa that cannot be explained as a result of migrations or interactions with ancient Egyptians.
Okay.
That the
Yeah.
only way that you can explain it is a result of shared heritage from an ancestor culture that survived in the daughter languages and cultures. Right.
Yeah.
Because then now you can kind of narrow down the where the people who started pharaonic Egypt came from.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
You get what I'm saying? So, like, this is why the linguistics is important, and the compared anthropology is important, comparative religion is important, looking at kinship, looking at kingship, rituals, burial rituals, and the like. Once you
Yeah. Yeah.
start doing that and you start going across Africa, it's undeniable where these people came from, right? Because they left their stamp there. Even the context of Ramech, right? The word Ramech that means a people or a person, and it's used for to denote Egyptians. It doesn't exist in Berber languages. It doesn't exist in the Semitic languages. But all over Africa in that belt, even going into Chiluba Bantu, for example, in Central Africa, that term for person and human being exists. Matter of fact, the word Oromo, when you talk about the Oromo people,
Mm.
that word Oromo is the cognate for the word Urmech in ancient Egyptian. So the Oromo still call themselves Remech in this modern day, but those terms don't exist in Semitic, in Indo-European, in Berber languages.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like so, it's a whole totally different way of argumentation that you have to have because of the complexity. And what people will do is they'll see the presence of people who may have originated in the Levant
Yeah.
and make the argument that the Egyptians look like them,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And that's problematic because that's not how the Egyptians depicted themselves in the vast majority of the paintings for over 3,000 years.
Of course. So yeah. So no, I totally get what you're coming from then. Even though you might get little small migrations coming in, it's not really a case of like because sometimes what people are doing is we have the Eurocentric claiming that these were pale people, Eurasian people, and all that. And then obviously, as where our people are doing the study, some of them more focused on not the fact of some of them focused on let's just prove that the black people in reverse. And then you've got people like yourselves where it's not a case of you know, if people come through on the borders or forget the borders. Actually, it's not even about borders. People can come through the Levant. You can walk through, and people can come out the Levant. So it's not a case of like you're holding it like, well, they were only black. But I think where you're coming from is that the foundation of the civilization, the culture, the heritage, the kinship, everything else, all relates to Africa and many parts of Africa in order to bring this into pharaonic Egypt and before and pre-pharaonic.
Exactly. Like
Yeah,
when you're
yeah,
talking about some of the names of the major deities, like
yes,
Amen.
yeah,
If you go into Kenya and places like Uganda, it's still Imana in terms of the name for God. In West Africa, it's Nyame, or it's going to
mm,
be Nyaming.
yeah,
Places like in northern Ghana and the like. It becomes in Jambi or in Zambi in Central Africa. This is where we get the word zombie from. Of
zombie.
course, they demonize it like they do the word, like they did Imhotep in the Mummy movie. I don't know if
Yeah,
you've seen that, but they have this tendency to try to denigrate and diminish the sacredness and the quality of African concepts and phenomena. So you're walking around saying a zombie and using it in a negative term when this is one of the most prominent terms and one of the most prominent terms that connect you to ancient Egypt. In the context of Amen, right? When it comes to Sekhmet, and Sakpata in Nigeria, right?
mm,
And when it comes to ISIS and ISIS in Kenya among the Kalenjin, right? And Aset in the like. These terms, like there's people still named Osir in Kenya and Sudan,
mm,
right? Meaning
yeah,
it's a word meaning someone who is upright, someone who has great character, a pillar of the house,
yeah,
right? So, we're still walking around with the names of 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 ideas and terms that you find. Like I show in another lecture, like when you're reading like the Pertin Heru, the um, the going forth by day,
oh yeah,
or the
yeah,
Ranu Pertin Heru, the words for going forth by day. When the deceased goes in in front of Ma'at or Jehuti, whoever's dealing with the scales of Ma'at, and
yeah,
they have to declare their innocence,
yeah,
the declarations of innocence. Ancient Egypt isn't the only place that does that. They do that in the Congo. They do that in places like Mali and Ghana, right? Where you have to declare, you know, so like for example, in a situation in Central Africa, in Democratic Republic of Congo, among the Baluba people. Let's just say, I'm dying, right? And you are a friend or a relative, and we have another friend or a relative, and we're at my deathbed, right?
yeah,
So when I'm about to die, I have to declare my innocence of any wrongdoings because we're trying to see, is your death a natural death? Or is your death the result of bad character and behavior that you exhibited in the community? And it's
okay,
either someone, so we're
yeah,
trying to see if somebody put a curse on you or something to this nature. So if you're able to declare your innocence of any of the taboos of the community, that you haven't robbed nobody, you haven't violated anybody's personal body and space, you haven't taken from any of the ritual shrines or any of all this other kind of stuff, then you are cleared in terms of whatever fate happens to you at that point. But
yeah,
at the same time, you, even though you're not the person that's sick, you still have to declare your innocence
right,
because we have to make sure that my illness isn't a result of somebody who knows me who put a kind of spell on me or poisoned me or something to this nature. So if you can declare in front of the ancestors and the gods that I
yeah,
have not poisoned anybody, I have not done wrong, da 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 da. It's a communal thing. Like
yeah,
this still goes on. And so this is cited in Dr. Chilima Lima Mukinge's text, Muntu Wan Zambi,
yeah.
Human, a Portrait of Human as uh, God's creation or something like that. Forgot the subtitle. He discusses it in there. You can see it in Chiluba and you can see it translated into English, right?
Interesting.
So,
Yeah, can I just yeah, it's interesting what you're saying anyway about not just only in Kemet, other parts of Africa about finding the common culture. And even like another one I wanted to bring up about the calendars, for example. You know, we have the Skella calendar, and then saying that the oldest one they called Adam's calendar in South Africa. So where do you see South Africa fits, or Southern Africa, we can call it, into all this? I mean, plus with the Khoisan speaking Click, the Click language, and also I don't know if you heard of Brother Doctor David Imhotep, who passed away during the ancestors. I remember watching him speaking about the oldest language he found was Click. I'm not sure where you stand with that.
well, there's really no way to date a language.
Yeah,
Unfortunately,
that's true.
languages
Yeah.
do not
Mhm.
leave. Uh,
Yeah.
they're not
Yeah.
it's not carbon based, so you can't, use carbon dating,
Yeah. Yeah.
what I'm saying, to date a language. Even if somebody had writing and put it on an artifact, you can only estimate or know for sure that at least that language was spoken around this time, but it couldn't tell you its origins or how long it has
Impossible.
existed.
Impossible.
And
Yeah.
so, but there seems to be a general agreement that the languages that have the clicks in them are some of man's oldest languages.
Yeah.
And with the exception of like Bantu languages that have been interacting with the so-called Khoisan languages and have adopted the clicks in some capacity, right? So like Kosa, you see Kosa
Yeah.
is a prime example. So, but in terms of these people, like these are some of the oldest people in general. I'm not sure if there's like a direct connection to ancient Kemet. However, I remember a researcher out of France who was looking at dental morphology and was saying that uh, he was looking at some pre-dynastic um, Egyptian fossils and was making the argument that the Khoisan or a branch of Khoisan existed in the Nile Valley in pre-dynastic times.
Is this someone that they
And
had called Bess? They considered them, or actually, could we got
um,
the pygmies? Sorry, the pygmies of Central Africa. Actually, that's I'm
yeah,
getting mixed
that's
up with the pygmies.
yeah. So your Khoisan to me looks more like your Narmer um, face, right? Or like, have you ever seen the her face hieroglyph, the frontal face
Mm,
hieroglyph? Like it's some of the earliest ones that kind of looks like them. And so that's something that I've been meaning to dive deeper into in terms of study, um, to kind of get a hold of that to see, how much merit. Because just because you see a group isolated in an area today does not mean that they only existed there in times past, right?
yeah,
Like just because you see people present today, like African Americans, we didn't exist here in the Americas 500 years ago, right?
yeah.
Um, but circumstances happen, and now we're here, right? And
If you let me just add on
go
to
ahead.
you, what you're saying, sir. Me myself, I worked under, well, studied under Dr. Enoch Rashidi. I actually got to meet him. I brought him. He came to Liverpool, put on an event. I've interviewed him, studied his work for many years. He actually encouraged me to start visiting a lot of these black isolated groups around the world. Like I went into Asia, I met the Eta of the Philippines, the black original peoples. I met the Mani in Thailand. I had to go into the jungles. I met the Orange Asli tribe in Malaysia. I met the Vedas in Sri Lanka. I went into the Pacific Islands, to the Fiji Islands, Tonga, Micronesia, Hawaii, Australian Aborigines, and then parts of Africa. So what I was doing is I was connecting on this global African presence. And when we say African presence, this is what Dr. Renaud Rashidi calls it. Now, obviously, I'm aware of these. We could say, well, rather than say Africans of Asia, yes, they are the first people to populate these lands, but they would be considered as Filipinos, the original Filipinos, original people of Thailand, or what we call Thailand. Now, what I've found in comparisons is they're all very short in stature, the people of Asia we're talking about. So when I look at the people of the Philippines, Thailand, Cambodia, these areas, they're very short people, and like maybe some of them like less than 5 feet tall. Now, when I was studying what Sheikh Anta Diop was saying, when he speaks about the Kushites going into Sumeria. Now, when he explained also about these people going to Sumer, he's explained who's in Sumer when they arrived. And you can actually see the depictions where it shows you very small, diminutive black people. He calls them negritos, like a negritic. And the same people who the Spanish and Portuguese were calling negritos, they were the people in Asia who I encountered as well. So at one time, it seemed like there was a lot of these small, diminutive, short black folks across Asia. Yes, we have them in Africa, like who we call the pygmies, the Baka people, and some of the Khoisan are quite short people as well. Also, I'm not going to forget about that. So, do you find like a connection with these short people? Maybe they've been conquered. They possibly been conquered by, and aware of the Gutiya people in Sumeria and who conquered Mesopotamia and these places and that. So, do you make any comparisons with these short, diminutive black folks?
No, I haven't been in the school of, looking for black people across the world.
Yeah, yeah,
And the only reason why is because with the advent of genetics
yeah,
and with the fossil records all showing that Homo sapiens sapiens derived from Africa,
yeah.
it's kind of a mute point at that point, to
Okay.
talk about the black presence, because of course, if the uh, if dark skin originates in Africa and then they migrate out of Africa, they're going to they're going to keep the dark skin, especially in places
Our
uh,
climates.
close to the equator, right? So that's
Yeah,
what you see in like southern India,
yeah, yeah,
Southeast Asia, stuff like that, right? And Australia. But it's understanding evolution and how adaptation works, natural selection and the like. You know, um, People start to look different. You can see, for example, in the Korean, Chinese,
yeah.
looking type people, croissant,
Yes,
right?
that's right.
Just with paler skin, and the hair straightens because the environment and stuff that they're in.
Yeah,
So it's at when we're talking about from a long evolutionary standpoint, finding blacks here and there is kind of irrelevant because everyone is a Homo sapien sapien. Now, there's a few groups who, you know, got it on with Neanderthals, and there's some Neanderthal genes
Yeah.
sprinkled here and there. But outside of that, it's really not, you know, it's culture and ideas
Yeah.
in terms that in languages that group a people together. And when I'm doing my research, I'm looking for those clusters of similar ideas, similar languages, and similar ways of being and doing things. What separates
Yeah.
those groups? So like even within Africa itself, those people who are Fulani, Bororo, Afar, because they have a nomadic pastoralist lifestyle, they live differently than the Khoi people who are hunter gatherers versus Bantu farmers, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So their interactions is more meaningful because we're looking for, like, if I just decide, for example, you know, who are the groups that have Ubuntu as a philosophical concept, right? I go to the languages, and then, those where I find it in the language, is it a paradigm, or is it just a word in the language, right? Like for example, when we talk about Ma'at exists in its cognates in the Collagen language, in Kikongo, in isiZulu, but it is not fully a paradigm. It's not the word that's associated with a paradigm like in Egyptian and the collagen. The word exists in isiZulu, but that's not their paradigm. That's not what they labeled their paradigm.
Okay.
So these are these distinctions that I like to make. So they got the word.
Yeah.
However, it is for what we would call Ma'at in ancient Egyptian, they would call Ubuntu,
Yeah.
even though they have a variation of Ma'at in their language.
Yeah.
The they they have made into an operative paradigm Ubuntu and Botopele, in parts of South Africa, where it's like in collagen it's Mat,
Yeah.
and Mat in ancient Egypt, and in among the Kikongo or Bakongo people, it is Kaninga, in Lungu, right? It's a kind of a semi paradigm within their context. So like it's these kinds of groupings that I make in similarities in terms, because at the end, you know, anybody can claim to be African if all humans come out of Africa,
Yeah. Yeah.
and if there's migration going out of Africa for the last 10,000 years, who's African, who's not, right? Like we're all Homo sapiens sapiens. So you have to. The only way that you can really truly identify anybody is culture and language, right?
Yeah.
Um, because as soon as you start trying to make skin color an issue, then because especially when it comes to human races, like if like how many human races would there be? Like if a Chinese man, has relations with a Jamaican, a black Jamaican woman,
Mm.
the offspring becomes what race? Right? Like, what does the Indian person who has a child with a like a North Indian person who has a child with a British person, and they have a child? And what if somebody from Germany, say has a child with a Moroccan or a Native American, South Africa? Like, these are all new races. Every single time a so-called, race gets together, they create a new race,
Yeah.
with their offspring. That's not how science works. That's not how the groupings work. And so, I represent a different type of approach, and I know our elders were trying to fight the inherent racism that bombarded the field. But in trying to prove the blackness of this group, we miss these underlying issues in the cultures that actually do more proving, for example, in terms of the Africanness of ancient Egypt than looking at skin color.
I think where I come from as well is we've got what, like you've just saying, everyone can be well is considered as an origin as African. Doesn't matter what part of the world you're at, because you all came from Africa. What I was looking at the works of Diop is where he was explaining the people we call Cushites, or people who are related to people from where there's Kemet, who have the cultural connection and a blood tie. Them going into Sumer, for example, and then he's basing things not just on what they look like, he's basing things on the culture and the customs, and also he also seen a connection to the Colchians. Um,
Okay.
so what I was kind of focusing on is yes, there's this beginning early migration out of Africa, the earliest kind of, but it's almost like we get told in a way when we're studying under the Europeans, Eurocentrics, as if there wasn't multiple migrations out of Africa at different points of time. So the way they kind of speak on it, I understand they speak about climate and all that. It was difficult to do this and that. Well, definitely ignore a lot of our seafarers anyway on that tip. So when we say like in the last 10,000 years, there's no talk, or even the last 20,000 years, they just seem to focus on this coming out of where, there's two different routes he show you crossing the Red Sea. And back then, obviously, the Red Sea would have been shorter. You probably just had tree logs to get over. You might not even need boats to migrate into where we call India and further on towards Australia. Then they show you the migration coming out of Egypt, the Levant area, and then populating different parts of the world. But there's no talk on multiple migrations. So it's almost like they speak on it as if like 50,000, 60,000, some say 70,000, 80,000 years. Here's what happens. And then there's nothing going on till not long ago. That's the part that really bothers me. It really bothers me that there's this gap between 40,000 years of space or 50,000 where nothing is going, nobody is leaving Africa again. There's an issue with that. There's a lot of blanks that are not really filled. I feel Diop kind of fills them in, but he fills them in round about, say, in the last, say, 6,000 years, possibly 7,000 years. But we still have these big gaps, like nobody's leaving Africa, if you get what I mean.
Yes,
Maybe more
and
work needs to be done
and
in it, I don't know, or something. It just seems strange, very strange.
the gap is in terms of information is closing, but we have to remember that if you're using Diop
Yeah,
as like a primary source
yeah,
of information regarding migrations and the like, remember that he was writing in the 1950s and 60s,
that's true. Yeah,
right? A lot has happened since then, and you're in today's climate, you're going to have to read a lot of specialized journal articles in text and the like, and you're going to have to get familiar with genetics and so while Diop and even Theophilo Benga are cool, they are the foundations. They are like the Wright brothers of classical African studies. So much has happened since then. Even the 1974 Cairo Symposium, like there's people who walk around and boasting this conference as if this conference settled things once and for all. There's no
yeah,
such thing as settled things once and for all in history, right? And especially at a conference. Conferences, you don't settle debates. You put forth information for further research. Like a conference is held to let people know what is the latest state
yeah.
of research and information.
At that
Even if
time.
there is a, even if there's a debate going on there, nothing is settled, right?
Yeah,
The what makes that conference meaningful is that Sheikh Joe and Theophilo Benga put Africans on the world stage in terms of having these major debates and discussions,
Yeah,
right? It forced the opposition to become multidisciplinary. You know, that concept of multidisciplinariness
yeah,
today is a result of Sheikh Anta Diop and Theophilo Benga because they came at
yeah,
it with from various angles. But there's a caveat there because in an interview with Sheikh Anta Diop, he mentioned that the reason why he had to do all that work is because he had no peers at his
yes,
time. So
yeah,
remember, this is 1940s, 50s, 60s, right?
right,
There's nobody there, um, on his level. So he had to try to master, multiple different fields. And Chancellor Williams said the same thing, right? Like this is why it took him so long, like 17 years
yeah.
to write that one book. And it was supposed to be a series, but because of his failing health, he
Is
just
that?
kind of rushed it
Ye-
and put it together.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
So,
mean, don't get me
but
wrong.
what
We
they
have got Renault Rashidi as well, who was speaking on. I mean, Adam Van Sertima, who wrote the book Africans of Asia, and he allowed Renault to feature in the Asia part of his book.
yeah,
And he's speaking on the connection of like Africans going into places like India to establish the Indus Valley civilization. Spoke about Elam, which is Persia. I spoke about Samaria. So I did also pick up on Renoco's work as well, and Adam Van Sertima's, but same time, things are just changing rapidly all the time.
but this is where I'm getting at.
Yeah,
Each one of these scholars, because they didn't have peers
yeah,
of high quality in their time, they took on a lot of tasks, and they really couldn't master all the fields and to know all the information. And what
yeah,
Sheikh Diop did in this interview is that he talked about creating research teams. Like he
yeah,
would have been able to cut all of that time in half and been able just to focus on one area if he had a team. And so
yeah,
this is what Europeans and stuff are doing now. They have research teams to
yeah.
be able to tackle. So if you had, if moving forward, we can't rely on the one savior that the ancestors send to come
Mm,
and be the super smart Imhotep,
yeah,
of the day and answer all the questions. It's not going to work that way because you don't have that much time to master everything. So
that's right. Yeah,
you need teams of individuals, one person who's a geneticist, one person who's an archaeologist, one person who is a linguist, et cetera, et cetera. And y'all come together and publish, y'all collective findings and assessments and reviews and rebuttals like that. And you have different teams that are set up the
you
same
need a
way. And this is
team,
what Shepherd
definitely.
to be up, right? And so, you I'm pretty sure Diep would have been on genetics, but that would have been he would have had to go to schooling, for a number of years to get and understand what was going on in genetics, right?
Yeah,
And so this is this is what like I speak to uh, Dr. Shomarker Keita, quite frequently. And he's kind of in the same boat. He's the only real black bioanthropologist out there taking on and looking at, Egyptian fossils, looking at genetic studies. He's like a Shekanta Diop. He has no peers that is from the African camp. So what I'm recommending is that, all of your listeners, I don't care what age you are, if this really interests you, I need you to go to school and get your degrees in that particular field, and then you come back and study and provide us with the research from your expert point of view.
yeah,
That's what we need. We need y'all to get together to congregate with each other. Make a pact. Like I'm gonna go to school for this. You're gonna go to school for that. However it needs to be done, we're gonna get it done, and then we're going to, um, update Theophilo Bingo. Sheikh Anta Diop, Ivan Van Sertima, Runoko Rashidi,
Yes.
Dr. Ben and et cetera, John Henry Clark and the like, even Robin Walkers and
Yeah.
because you need a team of individuals, people who are experts in that, who know how to answer the right questions, who, excuse me, to ask the right questions, when it comes to when somebody's making a claim, they're like, wait a minute, you can't do that. Our
Yeah.
method says da, 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 da. Like, where a layperson, wouldn't be able to catch those things.
Yeah.
So, that's all I'm suggesting is that their work was great for its time, but so much has happened, and
That's right.
we have, and we do have a number of scholars. They write in French, they write in German. A few of them do stuff in English, but it's growing from when Diop. And so what I'm saying, there's a whole slew of text and the like out there, um,
We can translate
that
now,
that
can't
were
we?
pretty
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So yes, it's a lot to do, but research teams. That's what I'm gonna throw at your audience. Go to
Yeah.
school,
That's
master
right.
this thing.
Yeah. Form a team, like you're saying, because I had Professor Carver on my show a couple of weeks ago. And he's
Hmm.
explaining doing things in groups and people who do things as individuals, how individuals spend so much time longer to be able to come up with any research and study. So what he was focusing on is Chinese people in particular. And he said Asian, but I think he referred to Chinese. And he said that they seem to study in groups. So he was saying statistically, Asians study less longer, where blacks and Latinos, that we put it, statistically are studying a lot longer because a lot of it's individualism most of the time. So, I mean, it made me really think. I've started doing a lot of group discussions as of late, and I've been trying to explain to people we need to have some discipline in order. We can't focus on the individuals. The individualism is like where he was explaining there's always one person who got the answer to everything instead of trying to connect with the group, build the group up, So definitely that's what I'm trying to do. I've actually got a show in about 20 minutes or something like that with the group. We've been having the same group on every week, and we,
Yes,
we did different topics we're trying to cover, relating to our people. So I definitely would love to bring you back on again though, because there's one podcast don't do it, but at least we've made an introduction
indeed,
which you give thanks to.
indeed.
And I like as well also the fact of making these connections, the Proto Bantu, where people speaking on ancient Sumer, for example. So we're not just keeping it in Africa, we're spreading it further out. And also, I'd like to speak on the Arabian language. So even though it's a Semitic or so-called Semitic language, do these have any connections to the Proto-Bantu places like Saudi Arabia or Yemen? And then,
Again, it just depends on the school of thought. So if you are in the Mboli camp,
yeah,
like I'm sitting here in the library right now, so I don't have my book or my copy of his book, but he released a book in 2024,
yeah,
uh, dealing with which is an updated or I guess a continuation of his research from his 2010 book. And so, he is arguing that it's a bold claim. So I'm letting you know that off the top. It's a
yeah,
bold claim, but that uh, essentially, all human languages are Bantu languages. Um, and so, but the Semitic languages are connected, regardless to what Theophilo Benga says.
yeah.
There are other. He's not the only linguist that comes out of
That's
Africa. He's the
yeah,
most famous, but there have been other linguists who, and the little that I've done, I've been able to show, uh, especially with my comparisons of Yoruba, Bantu, and Hebrew and Arabic, for example, that there is a ancestral, maybe distantly connected, but there's definitely a connection there. And so Mboli falls into that camp. But he's making the bold claim that essentially all human languages are Bantu. And
Interesting. Very
so I
interesting.
think that reading his text, he has a long way to go to substantiate that hypothesis, but it's not necessarily far fetched either, because we got to remember that there was a time in human history where uh, we were almost extinct, and there was like I think about a thousand or 2,000 Homo sapiens sapiens left, and so if that is the case, you know, who's to say that they did not speak languages of the same language group,
Yeah,
right? So if those 1,000 to 2,000 Homo sapiens spoke quote unquote a Bantu language,
yeah,
then um, then that would explain the uh, the similarities in languages as we begin to grow in population and spread out, saying across the world, right? Like it wouldn't explain like the Khoisan languages, like they would have been part of that remnant that survived with some of the old click languages, but there
yeah.
was another group that was quote unquote Proto Bantu for using Emboli's model, and uh, that's just something to consider, like all these factors. So I'm not taking a position on that. I'm just giving you what uh, he says, but it's a bold claim, and I personally feel that he has a long way to go to substantiate that. But
Yeah.
it's a claim that's out there, and it's not the first time that like he's not the first to make that argument, I should say.
Well, an interesting point you made before, which is you can't you can't know how old a language is. Well, the origin, the beginning of language, it's you can't test it. It's impossible. Like you said, you might see. Yeah, and when that makes me actually think. See, like the first time people left Africa, the first migrations, it could be possible that they had a language and they took it with them rather than we're being told language developed only in the last, we see different dates up to maybe 8,000, 10, maybe possibly stretch it to 10,000 years. Some people authors give, but it's not really that
I
long
wouldn't say
ago.
that. Wouldn't say that. So like there's like when you start studying linguistics, there's a part of linguistics where you study human anatomy,
Yeah,
especially of course the vocal, and that's an evolutionary part that talks about the ability for speech in
yeah,
terms of a modern speaking, the evolutionary for at least 150, 200,000 years,
right.
right? So like language itself, if let's just say that it develops around that time, like it's very old. And so if language started 10,000 years ago, then that means that, Chinese people, Australians, all them wouldn't have language,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. Of course.
So, because they've been out there 30, 50,000 years outside of Africa.
Yeah,
So yeah, for me, we couldn't make that argument,
yeah.
given the other evidence.
So there's always some form of communication, even if like you started with the click language, and so we can't
And
you can't
there's
even
no
give us a
evidence
date. There's no evidence of a date. Is the
But there's no evidence that the click languages are the oldest either. So we
Yeah,
gotta know the
that's right.
difference between, what is a common opinion, what is an
Yeah,
agreed upon opinion, versus what can be stated as facts. Because
yeah,
clicks could have evolved, after Proto-Bantu,
that's right.
but it's
Yeah,
just isolated to those groups. If we can't date languages, then there's no way that anybody can make that argument.
yeah,
And so we have to be careful about what we can say definitively and what are, working generative hypotheses.
that's right. Yeah. Well, give thanks, my brother. Hopefully one time we can do this again. Because it's I think we'd have to probably have a few different discussions, but I'm really happy we made the introduction today. That was the first part, making sure Asar Imhotep comes on the Discovering Show, Original Peoples. That was the main thing, and I appreciate and you've a very careful research of what I appreciate as well. Encouraging people go to school, go and study, form groups, teams in order to make your research easier and faster, which is important. I mean, like I said, I've done mostly the research, mainly I always seem to be by myself doing the research.
Mhm.
I try my best to bring people in, but people are always doing their own thing. A lot of people are just kind of doing their own thing and their own different studies and that. But
Yeah.
hopefully, yeah, we can do this again at some point. So this is James Diboe Discovering, dedicated to original peoples. Asar Imhotep, I give thanks, my brother.
Salute to you and to your listening audience. I appreciate again the invite, and I look forward to feedback as well as to us conversing in the near future.
Thank you very much, my brother.